OpenAI was basically nothing a decade ago, and now it's a behemoth. So there can be sometimes a trade-off between regulation and competition. Our system works well when everyone has a voice, even the biggest businesses.
Jason, thank you so much for being here with Harvard Business School's Institute for Business and Global Society. Jason, what is your argument? Is big tech too big?
First of all, let me just say, anyone who is sure that the answer to that question is yes, or sure that the answer is no, isn't thinking very hard and isn't very open-minded. But it's a debate, so you have to be on one side, and I'm going to say no, it's not too big, which I think has about 75% merit, if not 100% merit. And that's because, one, why did the companies grow big? They grew big because people like their products. And their products work better at scale. They work better with networks. That's something that's hard to reproduce in a small way. Also, a lot of things people don't like, all the hate on social media, you'd still have that if you had 8 small social media channels instead of one large one. In fact, it might even be even worse in that case. And the final thing is just there hasn't been any good plan I've seen put forward to break up big tech. So it's always, how do you compare something? You have to compare it to the alternative. And I don't think the alternatives here are that compelling.
Let's talk about the tech sector. 7 tech stocks account for about a third of the market cap of S&P 500. Should we be worried about that? And who should be worried most?
Look, it terrifies me. It terrifies me about where the market is today, what that means for the future of the market. But what would be even worse is to not have those 7 tech stocks and to not have those 7 tech stocks here in the United States. So, they've given a lot. Is that all going to be sustainable? Is some of that going to be taken back at some point? I don't know exactly. But certainly, when you're sitting in Europe looking at the United States, you're really jealous. You wish you had, 7 stocks like that in your indices.
Some say the problem with tech is less about size and more about accountability. How can we hold the tech giants accountable?
I do think accountability matters. I think in favor of some form of regulation in this space. I chaired an expert review panel for the UK government. We came up with recommendations, established what's called the Digital Markets Unit, something they've legislated in the UK. So I think there's, to make sure there's not bad behavior in the competitive space. On safety, there's a very important set of issues. Some of the concerns we have are related to speech, and there's other countries that do regulate things about speech. We don't here in the United States. But the last thing I'd say about regulation is you have to be really careful, because often the biggest companies can navigate it with the greatest ease, and it becomes yet another barrier to entry that actually reduces competition. And so there can be sometimes a trade-off between regulation and competition.
Let's talk about AI. Microsoft and OpenAI now dominate the landscape. In fact, OpenAI just completed a deal that values the company at $300 billion. Is this dominance creating a problem?
This, to me, is actually one of the biggest reasons I've changed my mind on the issue, which is that it's an incredibly competitive space. OpenAI was basically nothing a decade ago, and now it's a behemoth. Anthropic is quite successful. DeepSeek is very successful with even less, capital expenditures than those first two. And so this is a space, you're a Google, you're a big company. You can't just rest on your laurels and assume everything else automatically follows. There's always going to be someone nipping at your heels, and in this case, going a lot further than just nipping at heels.
Do you think the American public understands what's at stake when it comes to size?
People have sort of 2 sides to them in all these companies. And I think they're right to have those 2 sides. They love their products. They have very high favorability. I mean, people, like Amazon. It's not like demonizing Amazon is a popular position for a politician to make when people are ordering things on Amazon and think it's good service. But people are also concerned about the attention issues, about what it does to our children, about the way our politics gets distorted by all of it. And I think people are fundamentally wise and right in carrying both of those ideas in their head at the same time.
So what would your advice be to the Trump administration now as it looks at potentially regulating big tech?
I'd say they're going to approach it with a light hand, so I'm not that worried. But first of all, do it in a principled economic way. Don't reward companies you like. Don't retaliate against companies you dislike. There's too much at stake here to make this a political football. Second, there's a set of economic principles. And how do you get all the benefits of scale and scope and networks while continuing to make it a vibrant competitive space? Because ultimately, that competition really does benefit consumers. And balancing those two is a careful, delicate process that I wish this administration luck in doing.
There's a growing split between traditional economic thinking and mission-driven capitalism. Do you see any value in a middle path?
I'm pretty old-fashioned and largely agree with Milton Friedman that businesses should be focused on profits, and then the government should be focused on regulations or tax policy or whatever it is, such that when the businesses are maximizing their profits, they're doing it in a way that maximizes, broader societal well-being. So I believe in businesses being businesses and governments being government, and don't love the mixture between the two.
And what do you think caused that rise for some time in stakeholder capitalism? And do you think it's dead?
First of all, I'm not sure how much of that rise was a reality of corporations behaving differently or a set of messaging. Second of all, some of it matters to their customers. And to their employees. But look, I don't want to see a company go and plant one tree and say we've solved climate change. I want to see the government doing very extensive and ambitious things to solve climate change that, by the way, will create incentives to and a mechanism for companies to do a lot more. In some cases, that social responsibility by businesses is a complement to the government doing more. Businesses, for example, tried to keep the first Trump administration in the Paris Climate Agreement. So I think that was a terrific thing they did. But sometimes it's like, oh, we just planted a tree. You don't need to regulate us. That second part is the part I particularly dislike.
Do you have some skepticism around organizations like the Business Roundtable, which was trying to push businesses to take this approach?
I like the Business Roundtable. But, I like them best when they're saying what is in the interest of the corporations that are their members. And that's most of what they do. And then sometimes they're right and they're constructive about immigration or education or training. And sometimes they want lower taxes for their members. And that might be different from what is the social interest. But our system works well when everyone has a voice, even the biggest businesses.